Well, this is the time of year that we lose friends and family. And I lost a friend on the 7th. It was my first friend. We met in the summer of 1951. So here's my tribute to my first friend, Vic.
Leaving Niagara for a week's holiday in Haliburton in late summer took a lot of adult planning in the 50s. This meant scheduling between the peach harvest, spraying, slopping the hogs, milking Bossy, feeding the chickens, and all the other farm chores for Vic. When you're 11 going on 12 and you live on a small farm and you can drive the tractor, you can work all day and you do most of the work on a farm that someone twice your age can do. Vic's parents were reluctant to give him some time off, so our parents met, and it was agreed Vic could go. They determined the week to be the 3rd week in August 1957. We would head out on the Monday, but we had to be back the following Saturday, right around dinner time. Well, supper time, dinner for them was lunch. That way neither family would miss Sunday church. Church attendance was an important part of the lives of both our families then. Vic went to church twice on Sundays, once in the morning, and then back again in the evening. Getting ourselves ready for a trip to Gull Lake was easy. Kites. We needed kites, the ones we made and we flew on the escarpment, using stubby fishing poles and 20-pound fishing line. These rod and reel flying kites were encircled once by 2 hawks, a mid-March day when we launched them into a stiff breeze, sailing out a mile or more, we thought, atop the escarpment. The kites came with fishing poles, black flight-tested fishing line, then bathing suits, change of undies, shorts, jeans, running shoes, and raincoats. There it was. We were ready to go. Raincoats, Vic said. Why should we take a raincoat? If it rains, let's just put on our bathing suits. Vic was so logical because, well, he was older. In the end, we decided to leave the kites and the raincoats at home. We were packed and ready to go long before we actually went. You see, after Hurricane Hazel in 1954, it didn't take much coaxing for me to go swimming with Vic. In his temporary barnyard pool, we even learned how to swim in rain-swollen ditches in the summertime. Agreeing to forget about raincoats to take to an island holiday was easy. And then he asked, well, what about our apple slingers? Apple slingers were 6 to 7 foot handcrafted mountain protector weapons. Our older brothers had invented, and they passed them on to us. In mid-late August and all through September, we went back to the abandoned apple orchard behind the Creelmans, just there at the toe of the escarpment. We cut ourselves a wild apple slinger. The best slingers were suckers, a ramrod straight branch growing from the base of a tree. All we needed was a good eye and a pocket knife. Vic's knife was always sharper than mine. His dad had a grinder in the barn, and Vic knew how to sharpen his knife with it. He taught me how one afternoon, too. We had to pick the right apples, not the ripe ones, the right ones that stayed on the end of a hand-sharpened apple slinger as we swayed it back and forth. Expert slingers have the grace of a fly-casting champion, and they know how and when to release the apple from the swaying slinger. We both got to be pretty good slingers, because we collected baskets of the right ones and would practice on the north side of the hog barn. One fall, Vic found some white paint, and he etched 2 white rings. He called it the donut target, right beside the red-painted outline of a hockey net. We stood back at 30 paces or so, and the competition started. You got 5 points if an apple was slung inside the smallest ring, 2 points if it landed outside that but inside the larger ring, and zippo if you missed either rings. And then, of course, -2 if you missed the shed altogether. There's something about the sight and sound of a green apple you've slung splatting itself against the weathered wood of a 30-year-old hoghouse. In August, inside the donut dead center, a 5-point ringer. Especially when you're 3 points down. A ringer apple splat was affirmation of excellence, of achievement, skill, and ability. We both knew it. Splat marks on the shed often lasted a week or more when you were able to sling an apple hard enough. This apple slinging sport has an apprenticeship all of its own, and it starts with skin splitting. To be able to split the skin of a self-slung apple was the first step to becoming professional. It meant you were strong enough to whip the slinger fast enough to get its split speed, and accurate enough to hit the hog house. The only thing left was to get strong and fast enough to crush a green apple against the clapboard hog house wall. Vic had an older friend from up the hill. His name was Frank. Frank was awful. Frank was so accurate he could crush 3 out of 5 apples in a row. The reason, Vic told me much later, was that Frank hit the siding where it was supported by a 2x4 frame on the inside of the shed. That way the siding couldn't bend and shock absorb the apple. It crushed it, in fact. Frank knew how to miss the 2x4s, too. One afternoon he put 3 greenies right through the hog house siding in 3 different places. And by the way, we decided not to take our apple slingers north, because I remembered there's no apple trees on Sugar Island. Well, while we're on the topic of Frank, let me tell you, Frank was special, and he made snowballs a special way, too. When he changed the oil in his car, he kept some of the old oil aside for our midwinter games. Frank's the only one I ever met who dipped his bare hands in the oil and then made a snowball. Oiled hands make a better snowball than gloves, and he could do it all day. One day we joined in. Frank was 16. His hands were bigger, so his snowballs were bigger. There was only one of him, and we had 2 or more, and we made small grease snowballs with our smaller hands about the size of a tennis ball. The snowball fight was over the house. Frank was on the east side, always on the east side. We were on the west. He gave us our handicap, the wind. The winds on the bench off the escarpment almost always blow from the west. It worked. Those fights were basically fair. Come to think of it, I haven't seen Frank since our Winter '59 oil ball series. The one he won. He was 18 then, a lot stronger. Only gave us a quart of oil that day. He kept a gallon for himself. We couldn't keep up with his production line. Our oil ran out. Our hands got cold. We surrendered that series just before lunch. Frank was a champion. I wonder what he's doing now. And Vic had his own way with snow. He didn't like the oil ball fights very much. But Vic was a first-class sledder. In early November each year, sometime around my birthday, about that time, when we were the same age for a month or so, we'd head out to the course. A crisp Saturday when all the chores were done, about an hour or so just before dark, we'd load up a wheelbarrow with the needed course maintenance tools, like the Swedish saw, 2 shovels, a stiff-pronged rake, tree and grape pruners. A small fruit farm on the bench has all the tools that 2 kids need to build and maintain a toboggan run off the escarpment. Neither of us liked going straight downhill, because we had that whenever we wanted it. We just had to go further up the escarpment past the Vaughns when the snow was right. But straight downhill got boring after 3 or 4 runs. The track we designed, or Vic designed, built and maintained, was a challenge for any 11 to 12-year-old sledder anywhere. The course started downhill slowly, off a little talus slope about halfway up the escarpment, just past their sulphur spring. There was also a sulphur spring in the ravine at Annandale. We had 6 to 7 turns and several straightaways, with a long finish down the frozen creek bed that led to the ravine in Annandale. Vic figured the run was close to half a mile. I don't think it was, but we never went back to check. I do remember it took several Saturday after chores hours to get her ready. We used tree pruners to cut back the big branches and grape cutters to trim the small ones. The Swedish saw to cut a few saplings away if we needed to. The shovels were needed to firm up the banks, and the rake to smooth the run out. Each spring, the toboggan run became a run-off creek down the escarpment. Some of the bank curves and the track got washed away each year, and each year new rocks were exposed, and they had to be dug out, then covered over with dirt and raked level. Vic was foreman. The run was on his property. I was the labor pool, with the promise of first run when the snows had fallen enough to sled. That winter, the second snowfall came 2 days before Christmas. Still not enough, Vic said. The rocks will tear the bottom out of that toboggan. His 6-seater toboggan was his pride and joy. Mine, too. We both knew that he'd have to have a good toboggan to run on the escarpment. And the chance to use it, you needed 2 things: good snow and patience. The second snowfall that year brought a foot or more, as I recall. We don't get snowfalls now much like we got in the 50s, because it fell in December and stayed until almost mid-March. You could work with it, you could play with it, and you could be on it all winter. Vic had a theory that we had to wait at least a day after a good snowfall before we used it. Kind of like letting paint dry before you use a freshly painted set of stairs. He figured that the snow would settle, and after a day of settling, you could cut a good snow cover with a square-edged shovel, and you could make snow bricks. You could use those bricks to make anything. That's what Vic believed. After a day and a good snow, we would head up to the mountain course, start at the bottom, and work our way to the top. Vic took the left side of the track, I took the right, making snow bricks to build up the run, to make the banked turns even higher, and the straightaways faster. Vic was kind of like a toboggan run engineer. And that Christmas we got the best gift of all, 10 inches of new snow. Our prayers had been answered. A hockey stick and the usual candy-stuffed stocking was fine and lots, but fresh snow for the toboggan run, that was more than money could buy. We got what 2 kids living on the escarpment dream of, a gift of snow, a gift from the gods that would last for months. The best time of day to toboggan is between 3:30 and sundown. We couldn't break free from festivities and chores that Christmas day, but the sun and the temperature did. In the lee of the escarpment on a calm winter day with little or no cloud cover, the sun would often turn flakes on the surface of the run, small flakes into small water droplets, by noon, and then by mid-afternoon they'd refreeze and create a thin film ice cap on the course. These conditions meant speed. We didn't know how much more. Vic knew caution was needed. "Be careful on that first run, Tom." I can still hear him say that. We both rode a toboggan face first. We had more control. Steering with our hands was much better than trying to steer with your feet. We tried it both ways. Tobogganing face first is faster, too, because there's less wind resistance. Vic knew all about wind resistance. He and his brother Tom had shown me how to get the most out of a bike when you ride on a downhill glide. "Tobogganing's much the same," he said. And lying face down at the start of that first run that holiday Christmas is etched in my mind as the best Christmas card I ever got. I surveyed the course from the perspective of a field mouse. The deer, the rabbits, and fox had used the run before we got there that day. They always used the run for their up-down tracking on the escarpment. This was before the Bruce Trail was etched. Winter animals used our course, and we were thankful for it. Their morning path footprints, now ice-capped memoirs, made the run even faster because the track was now uneven, Vic said, and the toboggan had less resistance, less friction, and our winter friends had helped to make it faster. I heard him say, "So let's set her up. Let's go." I tugged on my woolen mitts. Vic wore leather ones because he used them for farm work. I pulled my toque over my ears and around my eyes and flipped the front of the toque forward just like a race car driver. This part of the mountain forest was silent now except for the seesaw sound of the toboggan going back and forth over the ice snow at the start line. Vic was setting the pace and the speed for this first run. If he let you go too fast, you'd wind up clotheslined on a cedar or even worse, scarred for life by the hawthorn bush on turn number 2. I could feel the seesaw rhythm slowing a bit, and I breathed a sigh of relief that Vic wasn't going to make this an Olympic run, just a warm-up run. I was in his hands, and when you're the best of friends, this is not a problem. It's an unspoken trust you have, you know. Well, you can feel it, even at the age of 9 or 10 or 11. Vic let me go, and the run came at me like a CinemaScope movie. Glorious, perfect. Then we almost lost it on turn 5, then flew straight off the top of turn 7 into a full air jump onto the ice-capped flats beside the creek. The toboggan flew down the creekside, gliding past the X Vic had blazed in the wild pear tree when his brother Tom had set the course length record a few years back. But this run was 10 feet past. I yelled out, "Victory!" At the starting line, Vic knew exactly what that one word meant. Turning and stepping into the loop rope lead of the toboggan, I ran back up the course, beside the course, pumping my arms and dragging the toboggan behind me with the rope around my waist. Vic was already at turn 5, adding more snow bricks. The first run track was far too near the top of that bank, and soon it was going to be Vic's turn. At the top of the run, he said to me, "Tom, give her all you got." So I grabbed him by the shoulders, and I rocked him and the toboggan back and forth 7 times as hard as I could, and then I let him go and lost sight as soon after he flew by that first turn. When you're on top of the toboggan run with several bank turns, you can't see the sledder for very long. You can only listen to the run. That time there was only the rhythmic swish around turns and a little rattle on every straightaway. By replaying my own run with his soundtrack, his track went on and on and on. Well, Vic set a new hill record. Unless I put on some weight, I could never beat him. It was his course, his ideas, his design, his dad's land. Only right that he should win. Vic's distance that year was never beaten by anyone and still stands. It's marked with an X on the third wild pear tree on the west side of the creek. Likely grown over by now. It's there on the bench near a ravine on the escarpment, where hawks soar with kites, winters make friends, and footprints are made forever on your heart.